Hello all you knitters and hookers, and welcome back to Ben's Balls of Yarn. In this video I want to show you how to make this lovely thick warm scarf, which also happens to be the ultimate fidget wear. I made this scarf on a flatbed knitting machine. You'll be able to make the scarf on any flatbed knitting machine, and in total it took me about 5 hours. I recommend using DK weight yarn, and you're probably going to need about 350 to 400 grams of that. Although you'll see what I use to make this scarf in a minute. Stick around to the end of the video to get some extra tips to help you make the perfect fidget scarf. So I'm sitting here by my knit master, but this is a super simple pattern, so it will work on any flatbed knitting machine. And if you have a circular knitting machine like the Sentro, I'll show you how you could possibly make it on that as well towards the end of the video. You want to be using DK weight yarn. I've unraveled this yarn from a sweater, and it's about DK weight, maybe a little bit thinner. So here's the remnants of the jumper that I unraveled the yarn from. This jumper cost me £6 from the charity shop, and I've only unraveled the sleeves, so I've still got the front and the back panels worth of yarn left. And as you can see here, all of the yarn that I got from the sleeves was about 100 grams of acrylic yarn. I don't know if this is going to be enough, but I really hope it is, because of all the jumpers I've unraveled, that one was the most pain in the arse, and I don't know why. Just before we start, I am wearing a hat because I didn't sort out my hair and I don't want to. Okay, let's make this scarf. So this is the little sample that I knit up, which was the basis for this scarf. I just love the texture and how springy it is. And here you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bumps across. I feel like this is a little bit narrow, so I'm going to do 15 bumps across, but you can do as many bumps as you like, and I'll show you how to do that on the machine in a moment. It is about 60 rows of knitting, and it came out about 20 centimeters. So obviously you might want to knit up your own sample, but I'm going to say that about 60 rows is 20 centimeters. So if you want a 2-meter long scarf, you're going to want 600 rows. So obviously you can make your scarf as wide or as narrow as you like, so I'm just going to show you how to set up the needles for that. So we're always going to start with 2 needles, and I'm going to push those all the way out. Then I'm going to skip 3, push 3 out, skip 3, push 3 out, skip 3, push 3 out. Every time we skip 3, this is going to make a bump in our scarf. So that's the skip 3, skip 3, skip 3, skip 3. So I want mine to be 15 bumps wide. So I'm going to make sure I have 15 lots of skip 3. Okay, and then at the very end we're going to do 2 more. We want to cast on with some scrap yarn, and we actually want to cast on to every other needle. So I'm going to push back every other needle. I've just put a peg onto the end of the scrap yarn, and I'm going to put it in the yarn feeder, I want to say. I'm going to put my tension down to, let's say 6. Just quite a tight tension for this just very first row. And I'm going to run my carriage along all these selected needles. Okay, so you want to move your tension dial now into the correct tension for the scarf. And in my sample I had it at 8. 8 worked for me. You might want to work out what tension works for you for your DK weight yarn. And very importantly, we want to put the needles that we took out of work to this first row back into work. Okay, so I've just done about 15 rows of this waste yarn. Just going to move my weights up. And now it's time to knit with the main colour yarn. I've reached row 462 and I've run out of yarn. I'm gonna have to unravel more of that sweater. It's about 10 to 6, so I've spent about 40 minutes so far on this. I'm gonna take a break, have some dinner, and then this evening I'll unravel the rest of that jumper, and then we'll get back to this in the morning. It's the next morning! I'm just wearing my Christmas vest because I'm about to film the outro for that, so check that out if you haven't seen it. I unravelled a lot of yarn last night, so I hope I have enough now to finish this scarf. It's been about 2 days since I've started this project, but I've actually only spent about 2 hours at the knitting machine. I've knit 1,200 rows, okay, of this scarf. As you might be able to see, it's a little bit ridiculously long. If you wanted a 1 hour scarf project, you could just knit the 600 rows and finish off the ends with some single crochet stitches, or maybe you could use your crochet hook to pull through small lengths of yarns to make some fringe at the end. This is what would usually be the front of the work looks like. We've got these stockinette bumps, and in between we've kind of got this laciness from the gaps. And this makes quite a nice ridged design, I think. So if you wanted to finish your scarf like this, you could just do the 600 rows, and it kind of curls in on itself on the back. So you end up with kind of this thin scarf design. But I think it's really nice, and an hour for a scarf, who can complain? But I want to be able to see what would usually be considered the back side of the work to get this nice, bumpy, interesting texture. Obviously the scarf wants to roll in this way and hide all that work. So what I've decided to do is knit the scarf twice as long, and we're going to attach both short ends with a bit of Kitchener stitch, which I'll show you in a moment. And we're going to crochet single crochet stitches, US terms, along the edge of the scarf, joining the scarf like this. So we have the bumpy texture on both sides. But before I can show you any of that, we need to take the scarf off the machine. Oh, there's still some Lindt chocolates there. Those are for me. So my working yarn I've taken out of the yarn feeder and just left it to dangle here. So I've got my waste yarn and I've put a peg on the end, and I'm just going to put that in the yarn feeder, or whatever this is called. I should really look up some terms if I'm doing tutorials. I'm just going to let the ball drop to the floor, and I'm just going to hold the yarn in my hand rather than putting it through the mast, or whatever this is called. So I've done 8 rows of waste yarn. I would probably recommend doing about 15, just because this is going to be the end that's going to start unraveling. But I've run out of waste yarn, I don't want to get another ball, so we're going to stick with 8. And now to take the work off the machine, just remove your claw weights. I've got the scarf in my lap so it doesn't fall to the floor, and we're just going to run our carriage over the needles with no yarn in the feeder. Oops, and it's going to get caught, which we don't want. Luckily we have that waste yarn, that's the point of it. I have my scarf in a wonderful pile here, and the next step is anywhere we had to attach a new piece of yarn, we just want to tie a little bit of a knot in it. And now we're just going to cut the tail ends to about 10 centimeters, or whatever you like. We're not actually going to weave these ends in because we're just going to hide them inside the work when we crochet down both sides. So you can cut them shorter still if you wanted. You want to lay out your scarf flat so there's no twists in it, and then fold the scarf so that the wrong sides are together. I've obviously folded mine up so that I can fit it on my desk, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And we want to have the unraveling end at the bottom and the end that we started on at the top, like this. So this is the start tail, and we want to create a purl bump with this start tail. So if you can see here, we have a purl bump, and then if we move along we have 2 purl bumps here and 2 purl bumps here. We need to create a purl bump with this beginning tail. So I'm going to put it on a tapestry needle. My tapestry needle is pointy at one end. I don't have a blunt one, so I'm going to go into the work with the back of my needle rather than the pointy end, so I don't accidentally stab my needle through the work. And to create this purl bump, we just need to weave this tail end into somewhere in the back of the work. So I'm just going to go in here. I'm going to pull the tail through. So now I've created a bump here. And I'm just going to tie a simple knot in my tail to keep that bump into place. Now where we had one bump, we now have two. On this end of the scarf, I left about 1 meter long tail. So let's thread that onto our needle. So with Kitchener stitch, all we're trying to do is mimic the way that the stitches in the knitting already go. So here's how I like to do it for this scarf. There are 2 back bumps here on the blue side, and I'm going to go up through the first one from bottom to top. Then on the white side, I'm going to go into that back bump we created from bottom to top. And then the next bump on the white side, we're going to go down from top to bottom. And we have just created a pearl bump here, which looks like the same as all the other ones. So as we're doing this, we want to keep our tension not too tight and not too loose so that it matches the tension of the knitting. Now we're going to come back down to the blue side, and we're going to go into that very first pearl bump that we came out of, which is here. So now we've gone through this pearl bump, into this pearl bump, down through this pearl bump, and then back through the same one. So we've created what looks like a knit stitch. Now we want to go up through the next pearl bump on the blue side. And then up through the same pearl bump that we came out of previously on the white side. Now the next pearl bump on the white side is the long one. So we want to go into that from top to bottom. And back into the same blue pearl bump below that we came out of previously. Then we want to go up through the next pearl bump on the blue side, which is actually across from this long piece. And then we want to go up through the big pearl bump on the white side, which we previously came out of. And then we want to go to the next pearl bump across on the white side and go from top to bottom. And then go into the same pearl bump on the blue side that we previously came out of. And then go to the next pearl bump on the blue side and go from bottom to top. So we just keep repeating this, kind of weaving in and out. Until we get to the other end. Okay, so I've Kitchener stitched, it's so hard to say. I've Kitchener stitched all the way along, and it's actually quite seamless. The only way you can tell really is because of the blue and white waste yarn, so I'm quite happy with that. We now have 2 bumps left on the blue side and 2 bumps left on the white side. So I'm just going to go up through this large white back bump, down through the next white back bump, down into the blue one, so this is just like we've been doing this whole way along. But now the final blue back bump is kind of a bit twisted. So you can see it coming in here, and then there's a blue yarn going through it, and then you can see it coming here. So you just need to find that, because if you don't pick that up, it will unravel. So you want to go up through that one, then up through the white back bump that we went out of. Now we've finished our Kitchener stitching, we're just going to tie this tail end off in the back of the work somewhere. And cut that tail yarn. I want to mark where I've done this Kitchener stitch, so I'm just going to put some stitch markers on either end. Here and here. So let's start with the blue one, because the blue one is the easy one. Ooh. Unraveling the white end is going to be a little bit more challenging. So what I like to do is find the very first row we knitted on, and it should be easy to pull out like this. I'm just going to cut it with my scissors, and then I'm going to follow this yarn, and then I'm going to follow this yarn to the end. Ooh, and that one just came out. So on this end I'm going to follow this yarn all the way to here, which is here, and I'm going to pull it. And sometimes the yarn gets snagged and you might need to cut it. Sometimes it comes out nicely like that. And now we're basically just going to pull on each. Alright, I've got snagged here, so if you ever get snagged, just don't be afraid just to cut the yarn. Unfortunately, usually the cast on end does get put in the scrap pile. Okay, so once you've got that first one out, you should just be able to pull on each next layer just like this, but it won't unravel at the ends, it will only unravel along. So you want to do that for each one. So I've got a bit of yarn snaggage here, so I'm not going to be afraid just to cut through that yarn just to release it. And this looks like the final row. So let's just pull those loops out. And again, for the final row, you're going to have to cut the yarn to be able to pull it out of the work. See if I can get that out. There you go. And on this side. And now the yarn is still attached at either end, so we're just going to cut through this bit, pull that out, and we're just going to cut through this end with some scissors, pull out those pieces of yarn. All this waste yarn I just put in my scrap bag, and it's great for stuffing into little amigurumi toys. So now we've stitched our scarf together at both ends to create a giant loop, but now we need to attach these two sides of the loop to make a scarf. So here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to start with a slip stitch, and I'm going to put that slip stitch onto a 3.5mm crochet hook. I'm going to fold the scarf along the seam where we did our Kitchener stitch, and I'm going to make sure our tail is tucked inside. In fact, as we're working along the scarf, we want to make sure all our tails get tucked inside so we don't have to weave them in. If you look closely along the edge of the scarf, you have one looser V and one tighter V, and then one looser V, one tighter V, one looser, one tighter. We are going to be working into these loose V's. I'm going to find the first loose V after where we have done our Kitchener stitch. So that is this one here. And I'm going to put my crochet hook through both legs of that V. Then I'm going to fold the scarf at the stitch marker, and in fact I'm going to take the stitch marker out because we don't need it anymore. And here's my yarn tail. I'm going to find the loose V on this side of the yarn tail. So these V's all look kind of similarly loose to me. So I'm going to look for one. This one's obviously tight. So I'm going to look, this one's loose, tight, loose, tight, loose. So this is the first loose stitch on this side. So I'm going to put my crochet hook through there. And with my slip stitch still on the hook, I'm going to take my working yarn into my hand and we're going to complete a single crochet stitch. That's a US single crochet or a UK double crochet. Like so. And I'm going to tuck my tail end into the scarf so I don't have to weave it in later. And now we're going to go into the next loose stitch. So we're going to skip this tight one and go into the next loose stitch on this side of the scarf and the next loose stitch on this side of the scarf, which is here. And single crochet stitch. So here's the next loose stitch on this side and the next loose stitch on this side, single crochet. So I've crocheted all the way along to this end and now we need to crochet the other side together. I'm going to hold my work like this and I'm just going to follow the line of stitching down. So you've kind of got a gap here and then 1, 2, 3 bumps and a gap and 1, 2, 3 bumps and a gap. 1, 2, 3 bumps, gap, 1, 2, 3 bumps, gap. Oops. 1, 2, 3 bumps, gap, 1, 2, 3 bumps, gap, and so on until we get to the other side, and then I'm going to start my standing stitch in the correct space. And then I'll meet you back for the mandatory narcissistic montage. Okay, let me give you some tips before you start knitting your scarf. I'd highly recommend doing a swatch. So I'd recommend doing about 5 bumps of 60 rows and then calculate how long you want your scarf to be from there. This scarf I made using yarn I unraveled from a sweater, so I'm not 100% sure what the thickness of the yarn was. But leaving 3 needles out of work for each bump seemed to work perfectly for this scarf. Here I've done some samples in some yarn that I know is DK weight. And as you can see in this one, the scarf is rolling very badly. And when I unfurl it, you can really see that those large bumps aren't very prominent. So here I've done another sample in DK weight yarn where I've left 4 needles out of work for each bump. And you can see that the bumps are much more prominent and it's creating that effect we want. And here's another one I've done where I've left 5 needles out of work for each bump. And again, you can see this has lovely prominent bumps. So before you spend 2 hours knitting up your scarf, I recommend you do a sample. In fact, perhaps do 3 samples, 1 with 3 needles out of work for each bump, 1 with 4 needles out of work for each bump, and 1 with 5 needles out of work for each bump, and see which one you like best. Okay, that's it for this video. Let me know in the comments what you think of this scarf, and if you do end up making this scarf, you can tag me in Instagram at Ben's Balls of Yarn. If you enjoyed watching this video, and if you got to this point, I assume you did, please leave a like and please consider subscribing. This will really help my channel to grow and reach more people so they can see my creations and some of my antics, I guess. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!